We're glad you're here. Appreciate so much this good number. And we are thankful for those who've tuned in with us online, but we're especially grateful for all of you that are here in person with us. You know, one of the things that as we begin to hopefully come out of this pandemic that is becoming more and more evident is how much that we miss being with each other, right? And as things are progressing, we've had a few opportunities a little bit more lately to be invited to people's house and share a meal with them or do those types of things. And it's a reminder of how, not only how important they were, but how we have forgotten some of the things that we always used to do, right? So like when someone comes to your house, they come to your office, typically, when you get them in the house, what's typically the first thing that you ask them? What can I get you to drink, right? You want a cup of coffee? You want a bottle of water? You want a glass of tea? Something of that nature? It becomes kind of second nature to us just to offer someone a drink. It's very off the cuff. It's very relaxing. It's just something that we do. A lot of times probably without even thinking about it. And that's why we have a coffee pot. Unfortunately, there's no coffee in it. If people keep falling asleep in my sermons, we may need to pass out coffee. I don't know. We've got a cooler full of drinks up here. Water. We've got, this is peace tea, which is half lemonade and half sweet tea. I'm not sure why that's so peaceful, but that's what they say. Sparkling ice with caffeine, so if you're feeling sleepy, I guess you can grab that. Some Mountain Dews, which may get Dylan rushing the stage. Bottles of water. There's all sorts of things that we can offer someone to drink. And it's very natural to do so. Can I get you a drink? Can I get you a bottle of water? Can I get you a cup of coffee? That kind of relationship beginning process, right? Now, I'll be honest, I did wonder whether the elders would appreciate this visual illustration today or not. And then Ron Ayers played Mr. Ed singing Wednesday night in class. And I thought, there's no way I can top that. So unless I bring a horse in here, I think I'm okay. We ask someone to have a drink or something like that. That's just who we are. We're in a series of lessons. You'll recall that a couple of weeks ago when we were all together over in the activities building, we started this series of lessons entitled, This Is Us. And they're all generated from those planning meetings that we had with our elders and deacons and ministers, especially from our deacons getting their ideas and their thoughts about the perspectives that we ought to have, the goals that we ought to have, the focus that we ought to have in 2021. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about how that these aren't just things that we should be doing, they should be who we are. This is us. And we talked about a couple of weeks ago how that first section of it is that this is us, we reach in. And you remember we played Jenga. Chris Kelly sent me a text message after services a couple of Sundays ago, and he said, great job this morning. I don't know what the sermon was about, but you're a great Jenga player. So for what it's worth, that was the illustration that week of how connected we are and building each other up and encouraging and comforting one another. How that we are connected with each other as part of God's family. Well, this week we want to shift our focus a different direction, because not only should we reach in, but this is us, we reach out. And we should be reaching out outside those doors into our communities to share the gospel. So we're going to talk this morning about evangelism. And when we think about evangelism, probably the first thing we think about is that I don't want to hear a sermon on evangelism. Evangelism sometimes feels for us a little bit awkward, doesn't it? To invite someone to church or to ask them for a Bible study or something of that nature. And partly it's awkward because we make it awkward sometimes in the way that we approach things. You know, we will ask someone, if you were to die today, do you know where you would go? And the reaction has to be, are you threatening me? What are you talking about me dying today for? Do you want to know how you can keep from being lost? Well, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. See, we'll use terminology sometimes that means something to us, but may not mean something to those who are outside of the church. And partly that's because of the shift in our culture that we've had over the last, 40, 50 years or so, where we're living in a post-church world, where it's not the common thing for everybody to read their Bibles and study their Bibles and go to some sort of church, to have some sort of faith or some sort of relationship with the Lord. Less and less is that the case. And so it behooves us to begin the process in a different way, to not make it so awkward. So what we usually do to try to not make it awkward is something like this. There's a mask now, but there's also like this T-shirt that we'll wear. Want a taco about Jesus? Let us pray. And if you have one of these shirts, there's nothing wrong with having one of these shirts. Don't think I'm making fun of you. I'm not. This is Garrett's shirt, so I'm making fun of Garrett, actually. But when you wear a shirt like this, it's cute. And Garrett, I've been with him when he's had other people say, I like your shirt. People who already believe in Jesus. But I'm going to go out on a limb. Garrett, you've never had an atheist walk up and say, hey, I was wanting to taco about Jesus today, right? That's never happened to you, has it? We make it a little awkward because we try too hard sometimes, and sometimes that leads us to just give up because we're not sure what to say. We're not sure how to go about the process. When we think about evangelism, a lot of times we think of the televangelists, the guys with the bad hairdo and the shiny suits sometimes, and I'm not one of those guys, and I don't want to be one of those guys. In fact, one of the things that scares me about talking to people about my faith or about the church or about their spiritual relationship with the Lord is I don't want to be labeled as that guy. And so that causes us many times to say nothing. But the good news is evangelism doesn't have to be, reaching out doesn't have to be something that's awkward. It doesn't have to be something that is intimidating. It doesn't have to be something that we're scared of, because it can be as easy as asking somebody, can I get you a drink? Can I get you a cup of coffee? Can I get you a bottle of water? Evangelism really is just good news. That's what the original word means, is good news. And it's translated gospel in our English translation. Sometimes it's translated as evangelist, one who's sharing good news. But it's just good news. And even though gospel has church connotations, the Greek word just meant good news of any kind. And that's why, here's the good news for you this morning. Whether you realize it or not, everyone in this room is an evangelist. And you're thinking, yeah, this is one of those sermons where it tells us we're all like the preacher. And that's not what I mean. If you share good news, then you're an evangelist, because that's what it means to be an evangelist, is that you are sharing good news. So if you're on Twitter or Facebook, if you're on Instagram or some other sort of social media, or if you're one of those guys, and there's some in this room that say, I don't get on social media, but you get on your wife's account and look at her stuff, it's the same thing, okay? And we know who you are. You're an evangelist because you've shared that good news of, hey, I cooked some ribs tonight. It was the best recipe I've ever tried. They were awesome. Or just went to so-and-so's wedding and you post a picture. Or we just got back from vacation. Or just here's the first picture of our new grandchild that was just born. We share good news all the time. In fact, those of you on social media know there's not been enough of that here lately. It's been too much arguing and fussing and fighting on social media. And there is a real hunger that people have for good news, for real relationships, for hope. So much so that it's caused people to do a variety of things. Maybe some of you have seen some good news that the actor from The Office, whose name is hard for me to pronounce, so I'm just going to call him the actor from The Office, began while he was in the lockdown and just said, I'm going to do this. I don't think he really tried to start anything. I don't think he really anticipated how quickly it would take off, but he just started doing these little newscasts with the logo colored by his young daughter to just share some good news with all the bad news that's circulating. That's led to there even now is a website. In fact, there's several of them, but this is just one of them that I found, called the Good News Network. And don't go there now, but you can go there sometime, and nothing on that but news stories that are good news stories. People are desiring it. They want it. So they're thirsting for some good news. And that's what we get to tell when we reach out. Turning your Bibles with me, if you would, to John chapter 4. Because if we're going to get a lesson from evangelism, the best place to get it from, I think, is from Jesus, of course. And Jesus was one who did not make evangelism awkward. He did not make it something that was difficult or something that was not easily accepted. He made it as easily as, can I get a drink? And there's times when Jesus, of course, did do some harsh preaching, but if you'll notice, those times he was preaching to the religious leaders. When he's reaching out to people that are not in a relationship with him, there's some things that he does, some lessons that we can learn to help us to be better at reaching out. And we ought to be reaching out because that's who we are. This is us. So notice with me in John chapter 4, we're going to skip around just a little bit for time's sake, but we're going to notice some lessons here. You've got beginning in verse 6, Jesus and the disciples have been traveling and they get to Jacob's well. Now they're in Samaria, which is a place most Jews would not have gone to. In fact, the chapter begins by saying that Jesus had to go through Samaria. He didn't literally have to go through Samaria because most Jews would go around Samaria when they were traveling because they didn't want to put foot on ground of the Samaritans' place where they lived. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move on. But Jesus did have to because of what is setting up for us in this chapter. And they've been traveling. It says here in verse 6 that it was the 6th hour of the day, which means it would have been noon. And so by this time they were wearied from their traveling. Jesus has sent the disciples into the nearby village to buy them some food. He is hungry. He is tired. And as we're going to find out here, he's thirsty. And so in verse 7, he says, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Now, drawing water was something they didn't have the tap that they could turn on, of course. Going to get water was a woman's work in those days, and it was something that she would have done at least once a day, depending on the size of the family and what they were doing. Sometimes twice a day they would have to go and get water. Usually it was in the morning and in the evening when they would do that. But this woman has come, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute why that might have been. She comes here at this time, and she walks up, and notice now she's coming into the presence, this Samaritan woman, of Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah. That's the same idea. The part of the Godhead, the one that just 3 chapters earlier John told us was responsible for creating everything. And so the first time she comes into the presence of God, the Son, the first time that she's sitting here able to hear a message from Him, notice what the deep theological message that Jesus gives her is. Give me a drink. Just as naturally as if you walked up to our house, we invited you for supper, and you walked through the door, and the first thing we would say is, can I fix you some coffee? Can I get you something to drink? We've got some bottles of water. Melody's got her melody tea, we call it. It's sweet tea, but she makes it better than about anybody I've ever seen. I'm a little biased probably, but that was the message. Give me a drink. That's what he asked her for. Now, that blows her out of the water, but notice what Jesus is really doing here. The first lesson for us today is Jesus started the conversation. And that's what we've got to do if we're going to reach out. We just got to start a conversation with someone. And it doesn't have to be want a taco about Jesus. It doesn't have to be, hey, if you died today, do you know where you would go? Just something simple. Because there are people all around us every day that we interact with that are thirsting for something that they don't even know what is. And so many times we view them as simply just another piece of equipment that's in a business we have to get by. Maybe it's the waitress at the restaurant, or maybe it is the teller at the bank, or maybe it's the lady that's running the cash register at the convenience store where you get gas, or maybe it's someone that is working in some service industry around you that you see, you interact with, but you just place the order, you pay the money, you do whatever, and you don't really notice that there's a person in front of you. Jesus wanted a drink, but he first realized there was a person in front of him that needed a conversation started with them. And that's as simple as it is. How are you doing? Did you hear all the rain we're going to be having the next couple of days? Did you see the ball game last night? As was pointed out to me, are you really proud of this Tennessee mug still after what all's happened? I am. We hired a great AD, and so, I'm getting ready to get my bubble burst again all over. So, but something you can say that just starts a normal conversation. And then notice as you keep on in the text that's the way Jesus does it. In fact, Don Everts and Doug Schaub in their book, I Once Was Lost, where they went through, I think it was 100 millennials who were not raised going to church, who were brought to a faith to see the lessons they could learn from them. One of the things they say in their book is learning to ask good questions is at the heart of evangelism in the mold of Jesus. Once you start that conversation with them, then be a reporter. Ask good questions. You'll notice that's what Jesus does. Jesus was asked a lot of questions. Nearly 200 questions are recorded in the Gospels. You know how many times he directly answered those questions? If I counted right, 3 times. Most of the time he would give a parable, or the other thing he liked to do a lot was ask them a question. There was not a lot of Q&A sessions with Jesus. There were a lot of Q&Q sessions with Jesus, because that keeps the conversation going. That's what we need to learn to do. And then, if you notice in verse 9, the woman asks him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask me for a drink?" And then this parenthetical statement that John inserts for our help, to help us understand what's going on. The Jews had nothing to do with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were part Jew, part some other nationality. And so, as much as the Jews hated Gentiles, here's this reminder of Jews and Gentiles that intermarried, and we don't like that. The other thing was that the Samaritans were a reminder of their days of bondage, because that's when all of that began. And they hated them. That's why they wouldn't walk on Samaritan ground. And so think about all of the hurdles to evangelism that Jesus is jumping. The fact that she is a Samaritan, the fact that she is a woman, which a rabbi would not have talked to, the fact that we're going to find out she's living in sin, so a rabbi would not talk to her. And so she's confused. Why would you talk to me? Why would you ask me for a drink? But notice what Jesus says. He said, if you knew the person that was standing here talking to, he said, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. You see what Jesus does? They start the conversations talking about physical water, talking about, can I get you a drink? Talking about, can I get you some water? And Jesus turns the conversation into a spiritual one, and that's something that we have to learn to do. Is don't just stay on the surface level conversations. We've got to learn to turn the conversations to a spiritual relationship, a spiritual conversation. And you can do that over the course of time. You don't have to do it that first time that you walk in and walk up to the bank teller, I'd like to deposit $200. And by the way, do you know that there's an inheritance you can receive that'll never be taken? Then don't do it that quickly. But over the course of time, you can turn your relationship into a spiritual one. You can turn the conversation into a spiritual conversation. That's a tool, that's a skill that we need to learn to do, that we need to learn to use. And it takes us investing ourselves in people to get to know what their situation really is. For example, that guy at work or that guy that's in your neighborhood that you're talking to one day, and you say, Jim, I've noticed that I hadn't seen Mary and the kids here lately, Or, Sally, I noticed that you've here lately you've kind of been in a bad mood. Is everything okay? And then they begin to tell you about what's going on in their lives, and you can start to say, we had some troubles in our marriage. We've had some troubles with our children or our parents. Mary had that diagnosis that we dealt with. But turn the conversation to a spiritual one. In verse 15, the woman says to him, "Sir, give me that water." Now, this is something, again, that a woman would have had to have done every day, sometimes twice a day, is to go and get water. And he's telling her, "I've got some water. If you drink of it, you won't have to come get water anymore." Well, clearly, there's no such water. And you can almost feel the sarcasm dripping off of her statement. "Give me some of that water so I don't have to come do this every day." It was something that typically was done in the morning and the evening, as I said earlier, but this woman, it was an extra added chore for her, which we'll get to here in just a moment. So Jesus says, "Go call your husband." Well, her response is found in verse 17. She says, "I have no husband." Jesus says, "You're right in telling me that you have no husband, because you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. So what you have said is true." You see what Jesus does? Is he begins to make it personal with her. He's willing to go there, and we've got to be willing to go there. There's a lot of debate by scholars about what's the situation really of this woman, that maybe she's had 5 husbands that have died, and if that's the case, you can understand why number 6 doesn't want to get married to her, because there's a trend going on there, right? Maybe it's that she's been married and divorced all these times. Whatever it might be is irrelevant. The Scripture didn't tell us, but what we do know is that she's living with a man who's not her husband now. She's living in sin. And so typically when the other women would go, and morning and evening is not when she's going to fetch water in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day. Maybe it's because she didn't want to be out there with all the glances and the stares and the whispers and the people not willing to go there. So when you're talking to your neighbor and he says, things have been rough between Mary and me. I'll be honest, we're like roommates now. We're in separate bedrooms. We hardly talk. When we do, we argue. And I don't really know what to do about it. At that point, we have one of 2 choices that we can make. We can choose to say, I understand, and our marriage wasn't what it should have been until we made Jesus the focus of our home. Or we can say, "Oh, let me get you another bottle of water over here, okay?" Because we're not willing to get our hands dirty. We're not willing to go there. We're not willing to talk about what really is their needs. And that slows us down in evangelism a lot of times, because when you're dealing with difficult and sinful situations, sometimes it's hard to work through those. But if you've built those relationships, if you've started the conversations, if you've turned it to spiritual, then you're willing to get your hands dirty and help them through those moments that they're there. So in verse 19, the woman says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." You're clearly not just a regular Jewish guy. You're someone who is a teacher. You're someone who has some insight. Now, when people find out that you are a preacher, or they find out that you're a member of a church, what they typically want to do is they want to talk religion. Believe it or not, people in our world today love to talk religion. I don't want to talk about how it applies to me, but I want to talk about religious things. So then they'll start asking you questions. Well, what do you think about the book of Revelation? What does it mean? What about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit? Who is the man of lawlessness? Could God build a rock that he couldn't pick up himself? All of these kinds of things. They'll want to talk about religious things. And what they'll want to really do a lot of times is they're not looking for information, but they're looking for affirmation. They're wanting you to agree with them so they can feel better about it. And if you don't, then that starts the debate. And for all the good that can be done with social media, this is one of the things especially we need to remember there. Avoid religious debating. There may have been someone, I don't know, but there may have been someone that has been converted because they saw a meme on Facebook that told them, unless you become a member of the church today, you're going to hell. They may have read that and said, I didn't realize that. Let me go to church then. But I'm guessing that probably doesn't happen very often. Getting in debates and arguments doesn't win souls. We say it all the time. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And debating with people aren't showing them how much you care. Typically what happens is both groups walks away from each other saying, well, I showed him, and the other group saying, well, I showed him. And Jesus is not willing to get into the debate. So he quickly answers the question, and then he gets back to the focus that he wants to be on. Notice he says in verse 21, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. It's not really about the place. That's what you're wanting to argue about. So in verse 25, after he answers the question, she says, I know that Messiah is coming. And again, the parenthetical statement made by John that Messiah is the Jewish word for the Greek word Christ, the anointed one that's coming. When he comes, he will tell you all things. And Jesus responds, he says, I who speak to you am he. I am he. Jesus didn't want to spend his time debating on a religious argument because it didn't matter if she knew where to worship if she didn't understand the Lord. It doesn't matter if they know who the man of lawlessness is. It doesn't matter if they know about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit is if they don't first know that they need to come to Jesus. And so the next lesson that Jesus teaches us is that we have to show them Jesus in the way that we talk to them, in the way that we react to them, in the way that we serve them, in the way that we teach them. We've got to point them to Jesus. And in fact, one of the things that is most cool about this particular chapter is noticing, and I've got it circled in my Bible and lines drawn to it, each verse, noticing the way that she changed her thinking about Jesus based on what she called him. You'll notice in verse 9, he's a Jew. She would have recognized that just because of the way he was dressed and the way he looked. In verse 11, she says, sir, you have nothing. She's trying to be cordial. She's trying to be respectful. But, sir, you have nothing to get water with. You have nothing to help yourself, much less me. Verse 15, she's sarcastic, but still kind of being a little bit respectful. Sir, give me this water that you're talking about. In verse 19, she again calls him sir, but here's where her thinking begins to change. She says, I perceive that you are a prophet. So maybe you're someone I should be listening to. In verse 25, she says, are you Messiah? I know Messiah is coming. You wouldn't be the one, would you? And all of that ends up in verse 29 when she goes to the village where she's from, and she's telling everybody, this woman that was trying to hide from everyone, she's now telling everyone, come see a man who told me everything that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? See how her total change of the way she thought about Jesus. That's what happens when we reach out and show them Jesus. That's what we want to do. So how do we reach out? Well, just a few tips based partly on what we've talked about today. Develop real relationships. Again, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. So develop real relationships. Take an interest in people. Notice people, especially the unnoticed. You'll notice Jesus often did that. The sick, the lame, the poor, the blind, the different nationalities, the people that were in positions that most wanted to push to the side. Jesus noticed those. And there are people that our society pushes to the side that quite often will be quicker to come to Jesus than others. Notice the unnoticed and develop real relationships with them. As you do, turn your conversations and your relationship toward the spiritual from the physical. And as you do, tell them what Jesus did for you. We pull back from evangelism because I don't want, to have the answer to every question. Well, I don't have the answer to every question. Ricky didn't have the answer to every question. Our elders don't have the answer to every question. You're not going to have the answer to every question. But you'll notice in the New Testament, for the most part, the people that went out and are telling people about Jesus, They're just telling them, this is what Jesus did for me. This is how He helped my marriage. This is how He helped my addiction. This is how He helped my relationship with my parents. This is how He helped me through this difficult time. Just tell them what Jesus has done for you. Both for the opportunities to share Jesus with them and for the people that you're currently working on, pray. Because it not only activates God, but it also reminds us of those people we're reaching out to. And then finally, don't be weird. Don't ask them, do you know where you're going if you die today in your first conversation? Just love them. Help them. Serve them. And as you do, then you get opportunities to tell them and show them Jesus. That's who we are. This is us. We reach out into our communities and we build relationships so that we can show them and tell them about Jesus. There's probably somebody in your mind that you're thinking about that's in your life that you know needs to hear about Jesus. When you go home today, just write their name down on a piece of paper. Tape it somewhere where you'll see it every day. Pray for them every day. And let's make it a goal that before the summer is out, that you find those ways to build those relationships, to really develop those relationships, to invest in them, to go there and to show them Jesus through what they're going through in their lives. The only way we can do that, of course, is to have those opportunities. So pray for them every day. This morning, if you need to come to Jesus, if you need to come back to Jesus, if you don't know what you need, but you just know you need something, we'd love for you, as we sing the song of invitation that Garrett's about to lead us into, for you to come forward, letting us know that you want to confess Jesus as Lord and be baptized, or that you know that you need to come back to the Lord that you submitted to years ago, or that you just need to study. We'd be glad to help you. We'd be glad to study with you. We'd be glad to help you obey the gospel, because this is us. We help others come to Jesus in the same way that someone helped us. So if we can help you, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?